I thought I'd seen it all after 67 years on this earth. But never in my life did I expect to be treated like a criminal just for owning my own property. Imagine this. You buy a beautiful lakefront lot, pour your heart into building your dream home, and install a $3,000 security gate on a private trail that leads to your piece of shoreline. Everything's legal. Everything's above board. Then, out of nowhere, the HOA shows up demanding a key, like they've got a warrant signed by the president himself. When I refused, they didn't lawyer up. No, they called the cops. What they didn't realize, they just picked a fight with the wrong retiree. Let me back up a bit. I'm not some newcomer to the neighborhood. In fact, I was one of the first people to move in about 20 years ago, when the whole area was still woods, gravel roads, and promises of exclusive lake access. Back then, the HOA was practically non-existent. Just a few neighbors getting together to keep things clean and quiet. No drama. No ridiculous fines. No passive-aggressive newsletters slipped under your door. Then Karen moved in. Not her real name, of course, but if the visor fits, wear it. This one came with a clipboard and an overinflated sense of authority. Within 6 months, she'd somehow finagled her way into becoming HOA president, manipulating proxy votes, bribing neighbors with banana bread, and convincing a few retirees she was going to restore order. Well, her version of order looked a lot like tyranny, wrapped in official-looking HOA letterhead. Suddenly, we had new rules every month. Fines for having too many bird feeders. Fines for leaving a garden hose uncoiled. Fines if your shutters weren't one of 3 approved colors. And then came the kicker. She wanted access to my private lake gate. There's a special kind of arrogance that only blooms in HOA board meetings. The kind that wears pastel sweaters in July and refers to bylaws like they're the Constitution. Karen walked into that meeting like she was about to deliver the Gettysburg Address. I hadn't been to an HOA meeting in years. I paid my dues on time, kept my lawn neat, and stayed out of the gossip mill. But after she sent law enforcement to my house over a gate I legally own, I figured it was time to reintroduce myself. And I didn't come empty-handed. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, the kind with flickering fluorescent lights and folding chairs that make your knees ache just looking at them. Karen was already there, front and center, surrounded by the usual suspects. Bob, the treasurer, with his comb-over and calculator older than my boat. Marcy, who believes every problem in life can be solved with a seasonal wreath. And Cheryl, bless her heart, who's never met a rumor she didn't immediately share in the group text. Karen kicked things off with a speech, of course, complete with note cards. She used words like equitable access and communal stewardship. Then she dropped the bomb. She wanted the HOA to vote on reclassifying my private trail as a shared community access path. Translation? She was trying to take control of my lake gate through a bylaw loophole. Here's the thing. That trail isn't just on my property. It's entirely within my lot lines. It's not platted as a common area. It's not part of any easement. The HOA has zero legal right to touch it. But Karen was counting on nobody else knowing that. She handed out printed copies of her proposal, complete with hand-drawn maps and a grainy screenshot of Google Earth with a giant red arrow pointing at my fence. Then, with a smile that could sour milk, she said, "We think this change will foster more unity in the community. After all, we all paid for lake access, right?" That's when I stood up, actually stood, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You didn't pay for this lake access. I did." Karen blinked. The room turned. I held up a folder, the old-school expanding kind, with labels and color-coded tabs. The kind that means business. I walked up to the front, placed the documents on the table like I was laying down a royal flush, and began explaining, slowly, clearly, for everyone in the room. First, a copy of the original plat map showing the exact property boundaries. Then, the certified deed confirming the trail and shoreline were part of my parcel. The purchase agreement from 20 years ago, specifically noting the premium I paid for exclusive lake access. A notarized letter from the original developer stating the trail was always intended to be private. And then, the kicker, an email Karen herself had sent 6 months earlier, where she'd foolishly CC'd me, referring to the trail as technically private but we'll see. That little "we'll see" was all I needed to show intent to overreach. I turned to the board. "You try to pass this reclassification," I said, "and I'll file for injunctive relief so fast your meeting minutes won't know what hit them. And while we're at it, I'll call for a full audit of all HOA board actions from the last 12 months. For a few awkward seconds, nobody said a word. Then Bob adjusted his glasses and asked Karen if she'd consulted an attorney about the legal boundaries. She said, "No, but I've done my research." Translation: she Googled it. A neighbor raised her hand. "How come we didn't vote on this before it went on the agenda?" Another asked, "Is it true she sent police to your house?" Karen stammered, "It wasn't police. It was just I was trying to resolve." Then a woman 2 rows behind me stood up and said, "You sent law enforcement over a gate on land that's not even the HOA's? That's abuse of authority." And just like that, the floodgates opened. Turns out I wasn't the only one with a Karen story. One neighbor had been fined $75 because his mailbox flag didn't match the approved pallet. Another had her pergola application rejected because it looked too Italian. A third said Karen had harassed her for having a windshield that was too whimsical. People were done. The mood shifted. Karen started to lose control. What followed was a thing of beauty. A motion was introduced, not just to kill the Lake Gate proposal, but to hold a special election to replace Karen as president. At first, she laughed, thought it was empty drama. But the vote went through unanimously. They scheduled the election for the following month. Karen tried to save face, said she was proud of the work she'd done. Someone muttered, "Proud of harassing half the street." And just like that, the meeting ended with a round of applause. But not for her. In the weeks that followed, something beautiful happened. The neighborhood started to breathe again. People reconnected, talked over their fences, laughed at the mailbox. The fear was gone. Karen had ruled with a smirk and a clipboard. Now all she had left was a very quiet front porch. At the next meeting, she was officially voted out, replaced by a level-headed former school principal who said, "I think we've all had enough drama for a while." I smiled, nodded, and for the first time in months, walked home feeling lighter. The gate stayed locked. The land stayed mine. And the HOA? It finally went back to being what it was meant to be: helpful, quiet, invisible. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But when it comes to Karen, she preferred hers reheated, microwaved, and served with a cease and desist letter. Yep, she sued me. To be fair, I knew something was coming. People like Karen don't just walk away when they lose. They retaliate. And in her case, that meant small claims court. Because if she couldn't beat me in the HOA meeting, maybe a sympathetic judge could pry open my gate. I got the notice on a Monday morning, certified envelope, stapled complaint inside. Handwritten, accusing me of blocking public access to shared recreational amenities, interfering with community enjoyment of the lake, and, wait for it, causing emotional distress through intimidation and legal threats. Honestly, she wrote it like she was auditioning for a courtroom drama. I half expected her to cite the Magna Carta. She was suing for $3,500, mostly emotional damages, plus some made-up value of lost lake enjoyment. I nearly spit out my coffee. But most people would have panicked. Not me. See, I didn't spend 30 years as a real estate attorney to get pushed around by a woman who thinks being HOA president makes her the sheriff of everything south of the bird bath. I rolled up my sleeves, cracked open my filing cabinet, and got to work. The courthouse was nothing fancy: beige walls, ticking clock, a judge who clearly had better things to do. I walked in with a small briefcase, neat and ready. Karen? She came in with a bright pink folder, messy hair, and a stack of papers that looked like she'd printed them from a Pinterest board and WebMD. She decided to represent herself. Pro SE bold move. The judge looked down at the case summary, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Let's hear from the plaintiff." And oh, boy, Karen was ready for her close-up. She launched into a speech like she was on daytime TV. "Your Honor, this man, this neighbor, has made my life miserable. He's locked away access to the lake, which is a community resource. And now I can't enjoy the serenity, I was promised when I bought my home. I've been alienated, ostracized, humiliated. She sniffled, actually sniffled, then held up a blurry photo, clearly taken from her window, of my gate. This, she said, is the gate, Your Honor. A symbol of exclusion, of oppression. I swear, the bailiff smirked. She went on for nearly 15 minutes. Tears, dramatic pauses, even a quote from Thoreau about freedom by the water. I almost applauded. Then it was my turn. I stood, handed the judge a packet, clearly tabbed, labeled, and dated, and said, Your Honor, I'll keep this brief. First, I showed the deed, black and white proof that the land in question, the trail, the gate, the shoreline was private, bought, paid for, and recorded. Then, the HOA's own bylaws, which explicitly state they only have jurisdiction over designated common areas, none of which include my property. Next, the certified survey map, current and stamped, showing the boundary line running well before the gate even begins. And finally, I included a printed copy of the email Karen herself had sent months ago, admitting the trail was technically private but should be shared. That little line? It torpedoed her entire claim. I ended with this. This lawsuit isn't about access. It's retaliation. Retaliation for being publicly challenged, legally overruled, and removed from office. What's really at stake here isn't community enjoyment, it's control. The judge sat back in his chair, silent. Karen fidgeted. Then came his ruling. The court finds in favor of the defendant. There is no legal basis for this claim, and the land in question is clearly private property. Boom. Case dismissed on the spot. But he didn't stop there. He gave her a warning about filing frivolous lawsuits, about abusing the legal system, about the consequences of using public resources for personal vendettas. And as we walked out, I didn't say a word. I just smiled, patted my gate key in my pocket, and headed home. Some people learn the hard way. There was a moment, not long ago, that could have gone very differently. I stood in the courtroom while the judge leaned forward, voice firm, delivering a stern warning. Not to me, but to Karen. Miss Karen, he said, this court takes the misuse of the legal system seriously. If you continue filing claims of this nature, you may be subject to sanctions, or even harassment claims. She went pale. I could see it in her hands, how they trembled slightly as she tried to speak, to protest. But the judge cut her off. Case closed. While she'd been busy trying to sue me, I hadn't been idle. I'd filed a formal complaint with the new HOA board about Karen's time as president, specifically how she'd used HOA funds to hire her nephew's landscaping company to clear brush along the lake trail. A trail we now all know sits entirely on my private property. The audit that followed uncovered more than $6,000 in unauthorized expenses, payments made without board approval, no receipts, all tied to maintenance in areas the HOA had no jurisdiction over. It turned out she'd been treating the association's budget like monopoly money, spending freely on pet projects and family favors. The board responded swiftly. They issued a formal letter of censure and voted unanimously to ban her from holding any position in the HOA for the next 10 years. She was also required to reimburse over $4,500, non-negotiable, court-enforced. After that, Karen tried to keep her head up around the neighborhood, but the damage was done. 2 months later, she put her house on the market. She had to disclose the lawsuit, the HOA dispute, all of it in the seller's disclosure form. Word got around fast. Buyers backed out, twice. Eventually, she sold the place for $30,000 less than her original asking price. She moved out at dawn. No goodbye, no note, no banana bread left on anyone's doorstep. Just silence. I thought I'd seen the last of her. When Karen finally packed up her pastel blouses, her garden gnomes, and that smug little birdhouse she once claimed was a protected species station, I allowed myself to believe it was over. Good riddance. The gate was secure, the HOA was functioning again, and the neighborhood let out one long, collective sigh of relief. But let me tell you something, some people don't know how to walk away quietly. Karen wasn't done. Not even close. Even from 3 states away, she found a way to stir up trouble, like a raccoon with a grudge, and a Wi-Fi connection. Let's rewind a bit. She moved out in late October in what can only be described as a stealth exit. No farewell wave, no passive-aggressive flyer slipped under a door. Her house sat on the market for months. Between the court records, the HOA sanctions, and the whispers, especially from people like Cheryl, who couldn't keep a secret if it were glued shut, buyers were hesitant. Eventually, she sold at a loss and disappeared to a small town in Tennessee. According to her Facebook profile, she was starting a fresh chapter. But chapters end. Books close. Karen apparently does not. It started small. One of my neighbors, who runs our local community Facebook group, the kind where people post about missing cats and sell used patio furniture, got a message request from a new account named Concerned Former Resident 87. They claimed to be an anonymous former HOA member, just trying to raise awareness about mismanagement and abuses of power. Sound familiar? The account began posting vague comments under neighborhood updates. Asterisk, too bad certain board members are still enabling selfish land use. Asterisk or asterisk, hope the new leadership doesn't let personal grudges get in the way of lake access. Asterisk, harmless on the surface. But clearly Karen. I mean, who else uses the phrase land use abuses in a casual Facebook comment? Then came the emails. The HOA board started receiving messages from a concerned citizen, warning them about my history of legal aggression. Attached were cherry-picked screenshots from the lawsuit she'd filed and lost. One email accused me of intimidating neighbors into silence with legal threats and property barriers. Another hinted I was using connections in local government to avoid accountability. Let me be clear, I'm retired. I spend my mornings drinking coffee on the porch and feeding the birds. I'm not running some HOA underground resistance. But Karen wasn't trying to win. She was trying to poison the well, to leave just enough doubt behind so that, even from afar, she could still control the narrative. And sadly, it started to work. The new HOA board was made up of good people, well-meaning but not exactly battle-tested. They got nervous. At the next meeting, someone brought up community transparency and whether private property owners should be encouraged voluntarily, of course, to offer access to shared spaces, even if not legally required. Sound familiar? Then someone floated the idea of revisiting the trail discussion, not because they believed Karen, but because it might ease tension and avoid bad press. I sat there, arms folded, watching it unfold like a slow-motion car crash. They weren't doing it because they believed her. They were doing it because they were scared of the noise. I didn't raise my voice, didn't threaten legal action, didn't even speak at that meeting. Instead, I walked out quietly, went home, and got to work. Over the next week, I drafted a letter. Not angry, not threatening, just facts. I laid out the property lines, the history of the lawsuits, the judge's ruling, the misuse of funds under Karen's leadership. And I ended it with this. Asterisk, HOA boards exist to preserve property values and community trust, not to relitigate issues already settled in court. Giving oxygen to a disgraced former member's campaign only hurts the credibility of this board and the peace of our neighborhood. Asterisk. Then I got 42 neighbors to sign it, some I hadn't even spoken to in years. One of them said, "I've been waiting for someone to say this out loud." I submitted the letter to the board, printed, signed, and attached with a detailed timeline of everything that had happened since Karen left. At the next meeting, things were different. The board chair opened by acknowledging recent confusion stemming from external misinformation. They affirmed the original ruling on the trail and stated clearly on the record the board would not be revisiting the matter. Then they voted to restrict anonymous feedback unless it could be tied to verifiable resident concerns. Translation: Karen, stop emailing us. They even updated the community Facebook group rules to ban non-resident instigators. Guess what happened next? Concerned former resident 87 disappeared. Vanished. Deleted. Ghosted harder than my high school prom date. Just like that, Karen's last gasp at relevance faded into the void. After that, life returned to normal. The leaves fell. The lake froze over for the winter. My trail remained locked, still mine, still exactly where it should be. Neighbors started talking again. Real conversations, not HOA whispers. We even had a cookout down by the shore come spring. And Karen's name? It didn't come up once. She'd finally become what she always feared most: irrelevant. Here's what I've learned through all of this: some people fight with noise. Others win with patience. Karen thought she could wear me down with drama, paperwork, manipulation, even from 3 states away. But what she never understood is that the strongest fences aren't just made of wood and locks. They're made of truth, of community, and of a paper trail 6 feet thick. And now she's gone. Her tricks failed. The HOA is finally what it should be: boring. Exactly how I like it. I thought I was in the clear after all the lawsuits, the board meetings, the anonymous emails from 3 states away. Karen was gone. The gate was locked. The neighborhood was finally quiet. Too quiet. Because folks, if you've ever dealt with a Karen, you know they don't go extinct. They migrate. And just like a raccoon in a trash can, when one leaves, another's never far behind. I met the new Karen on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Only her name was Deborah. And let me tell you, if Karen was the queen of condescension, Deborah was the empress of entitlement. I was enjoying the best kind of retirement day, raining just enough to cancel yard work.